Finally, a class that will actually make use of shields. G'day, ZiggyD here, and in today's video I want to go over everything we know so far about the upcoming Crusader class in the Diablo 3 expansion pack. So I'm very excited for this class, as you can tell, because for a long time I've been wanting a class that actually uses shields. I find shields really cool. They're such an integral part of our history, such an integral part of combat throughout different eras of history, and then they've always been something that's been seen to be like this, really defensive, turtley sort of thing. But in actual combat, through a lot of different, historical battles and things like that, shields were actually used very offensively. I recently watched a documentary, in fact, that showed how to do sword fighting correctly with a shield, and how most movies usually get it wrong. And it showed basically that the Highlanders using the shield would attack with the shield and sword at the same time, and would use that to leverage their opponent's body in certain ways. Shields are just really cool, so I'm really excited to have a class that's going to make use of shields. So let's jump into what we know about the Crusader thus far, and I'll stop rambling on about shields for a moment. So, the Crusader is the new class announced for Reaper of Souls. It will probably be the only new class announced for the expansion pack, which I find to be fine. A lot of people were hoping for 2, it seems, but I think one new class per expansion pack is probably, a fair bit of extra content to play with. Basically, he uses strength as the main stat, as to be expected. There was already 2 dex, 2 in classes, and only 1 strength class. So now we have our second strength class. He's been confirmed to use flails, 2-handed flails, 2-handed swords, and has a very strong focus on, you guessed it, shields. So he can also, there's a lot of stuff thematically that adds the defense of the shield to the actual damage of the guy as well. So yeah, using shields very offensively too, which is really cool. I really like that. So there's also going to be exclusive Crusader shield in game as well, which should have Crusader specific effects like the quivers with the Demon Hunter, and all of the class specific items that we already have. The flails and Crusader shields would be the 2 class specific items for the Crusader, which is really cool. So overall, they play mid to close range. From the videos we saw, they have a lot of ranged abilities, but they're usually, they're usually like a melee ranged ability. So coming from Path of Exile, we're talking things like Cleave. We're stacking a lot of increased AOE to reach enemies from a bit of a distance while still being a melee sort of character. So this sort of mid-range character, which is pretty cool because the Barb is essentially a close-range character, whereas like a Demon Hunter or Wizards are essentially long-range character depending on how you play them. Now, the resource confirmed for the Crusader is called Wrath. It's not confirmed how it's to be generated yet, but it seems to be, based on what people have reported from the playtests, that it's generated through skills and over time as well. So it might just be kind of a bit like Hatred in that regard. Now, the Crusader starts at Act 1 like all of the other classes. You don't have to start in the new act with him or anything like that. It's pretty traditional. It works just like the Diablo 2 expansion pack did, if you're pretty familiar with that. Now, let's jump into some of the active skills that we know about so far. Now, this is what we know about these skills so far has been translated over from German, so some of the descriptions might sound a little bit stilted and entertaining. But anyway, the first one is called Punish, which allows you to hit your enemy. Yay! But it has some extra stuff. Your hits increase your sense of combat, which improves your ability to block. So it also requires a shield and costs 5 Wrath. Now it has a rune that we know about so far, which is called Retaliate. When you block, you do extra damage. So you can obviously see the really cool synergy there between attacking and also buffing up your shield and then using your shield essentially. So, every time you punish your enemy, you can get an increased chance to block, and then whenever you block, you increase your damage. So these 2 things feed back into each other. And then I imagine with some of the other skills and abilities, we'll be able to get some cool shield stuff going on there. The next active skill, so these are like kind of your main attacks, is called Slash, which ignites the air in front of you. From what I've seen, it seems to be sort of a bit of an arc, so I guess it's kind of like Cleave. It damages all enemies in that AoE radius. So it's your sort of a mid-ranged AoE skill. Now it has a rune that we know about so far, just called Long Reach, which increases the range. So there's your increased AoE for your Cleave ability. Lol, PoE. Anyway, next active ability is Justice, which allows you to throw a hammer of justice at your enemies. That's all we know about that so far. I don't really know what else it does, but it sounds cool. Sounds cool. Next up we have Scourge, which allows you to scourge your enemies, surrounding them in threads of hallowed power. The threads cut and bleed enemies they attach to, and will seek out new enemies to latch onto and punish. Sounds a lot like some of the Witch Doctor skills we have, where, you know, it plagues around and transfers between enemies and does damage over time. So it'll be a damage over time sort of attack that should spread out based on, you know, how large the pack is and things like that. That's a Wrath generator as well, so that one's interesting. Now it has 2 runes we only know the names of so far: Bound Fate and Razor's Edge, which, you know, I can assume that Bound Fate maybe slows enemies or something like that, and maybe Razor's Edge increases damage, or maybe, you know, does more cutting damage or something. I don't know exactly, but you know, maybe something along those lines based on the names of the skills. Now we have a few laws. So the Crusaders skill categories fall under laws, and there's one other one. What's the other one? Conviction. So we've got laws and conviction, where there's 2 separate skill categories. Here's some of the laws we know so far, and these are basically auras that are, you know, you have to activate them, it seems. So, Laws of Justice increases the armor of the Crusader and allies. While Laws of Justice is active, while it's active. It also has a passive ability, I believe. Okay, so they're kind of like toggle abilities would probably be the best way to explain it. So when they're active, they give you one effect, and when they're passive, they give you one, probably lesser effect. So when Laws of Justice is passive and not active, when you block an attack, your allies take less damage for a short duration, and that obviously requires a shield. So next up we have Laws of Valor, which when active increases the damage of the Crusader and allies while Laws of Valor is active. So obviously you're seeing a lot of similarities here to the Paladin from Diablo 2, and that's because that's what the class is inspired by essentially. And then the passive version of Laws of Valor is when you critically hit, you and your allies do more damage for a short duration. So you know, a pretty cool damage buff there, damage buff. Next up we have Laws of Fate, which when active increases the speed of the Crusader and his allies. And then while it's passive, whenever you dodge, your allies run faster for a short duration. So these are all really interesting and change the way depending on how you spec into your stats. So the with this dodge, for example, the Crusader is not a dex-based class, but we've actually, through experimenting with adding dex onto barbs, people have found that adding dodge can actually have a really good effect on, you know, strength-based characters as well. Like, it's a really good defensive stat essentially. So stacking some dex on your Crusader and having Laws of Fate going on you know, on the passive could be, you know, a viable strategy for gearing your character, which is really cool. Adds a lot more you know, variation in how you can actually build your characters, actual builds, not just, you know, it's a strength class, I'll just stack strength and vitality. Maybe there might be actually some benefits to stacking some dex as well. Now, I think that was all of the laws. Yeah, that was all the laws. Next up we have Sweep Attack, which is another active ability. Spread a mystical plague in the air in a large arc, dealing heavy damage to enemies in front of you. And that costs 25 Wrath, so that's a bigger hitting ability, it seems. Next up we have Shield Glare, which is really cool. Yes, finally using shields to attack. Temporarily blind enemies in front of you with your shield. I did see an animation for this, and maybe I'll chuck it in the video if I can find it. But yeah, it looked pretty cool, kind of like an explosion of light that comes out from your shield. Pretty cool stuff. It has a rune that we know of so far called Emblazoned Shield Rune, which blinded enemies sometimes explode when on low health. Yes, yes, I love it. So good. Okay, next active ability we have is Judgment. Roots enemies for 4 seconds. Pretty basic stuff, and it has a 20-second cooldown. Doesn't seem to have any wrath cost, so a free ability that you can use every now and then. And based on the fact that it's called Roots Enemies, we can assume it's an AoE sort of root, which is, you know, pretty cool for being that you're a mid-range character a lot of the time, depending on how you build. Being able to root a big group or an elite pack or something like that in place while attacking them from your mid-range would be a good way to you know, mitigate some damage. Next up we have Heaven's Fury, which creates an aura of holy power that burns and damages enemies. Now, I believe, no, okay, so the next one is Consecration, which is similar to that, but creates a ground around you that heals both the Crusader and his allies. Now, that has a rune, Shattered Ground, that the enemies within that area of effect take damage. So, Consecration and Heaven's Fury seem to double up a little bit, which they must have some other mechanics based on the runes. You know, there's a lot of extra runes here we don't know about that could change the way the skills work and differ them out a fair bit. But the base skills seem pretty similar. Shield Bash is another one. Blast enemies in front of you. Pretty basic stuff, you know, bash enemies with a shield. Good stuff, good stuff. Fists of the Heaven. Call a bolt down from the sky, damaging enemies in the area. And this has a couple of runes we know about. Tempest of the Heavens. Well of Retribution, which creates a well of holy light at the target that will electrocute nearby enemies. Lightning Rod and Reverberation. We don't know what those other runes do yet. Blessed Shield, which hurls a celestial shield through the air. Yes, another shield ability. Smashing it into enemies and ricocheting it between them. And it has a rune we know about called Staggering Shield, which I can only assume adds a stun to that ability. Next up we have Blessed Hammer, which summons a Blessed Hammer that revolves around you, damaging enemies. Yes, Hammerdins will be making a return. We don't know, I haven't seen this skill in action yet, so I don't know if it sort of functions exactly like the Diablo 2 equivalent, but you know, that skill was overpowered in Diablo 2, and Blizzard like to pay homage to skills that were overpowered in previous titles, but not make them as overpowered. Now, yeah, you could say maybe they haven't done a good job of that in terms of Whirlwind, because it was really good in Diablo 2, and it's still really, really good in Diablo 3, but that's thanks to some other abilities on the Barbarian that kind of worked well together. But maybe Blessed Hammer will be as OP in Diablo 2, but probably not, still should be a very good skill, I imagine. Now, Provoke taunts the enemy to attack you for 5 seconds. Obviously, a very group-oriented skill. I imagine the runes for that skill will give you a lot of extra utility based on those taunted enemies. So, taunted enemies deal less damage, or taunted enemies heal you if you attack them, or you know, various things like that. That makes that a viable solo skill as well. Because I don't think they would only put a skill in that's for group play. So, Provoke will also be one that I think works well with solo based on what runes you select. But at its base, it's just a taunt. And the final one we know about so far is Falling Sword. The Crusader is launched into the air and lands on his enemies. We saw this in the video, very cool stuff. Cooldown of 15 seconds, costs 25 wrath. It's essentially a teleport that does damage. The rune we know about this for so far is Part the Cloud. You create a lightning storm that covers the ground where the character falls, hitting enemies with lightning. Pretty cool stuff. That one was a really cool looking ability and should be really fun to use to basically just teleport, destroy your enemies, and build I think we'll see some builds based around that, which is pretty cool. And then next up, we have some passive skills that we know about. Indestructible, you gain 1% armor for every 5% life that you use. Incoming low life builds. That's pretty cool. Now, I actually really like in these games when they encourage you to either choose high life or high mitigation, low life. I really like creating characters that have a lot of mitigation, but actually a very small amount of life. That means you can stack a ton of regeneration, and it'll be super effective. Like your regeneration per point of life is much more effective than you have. Say you have 10k life, but tons and tons of mitigation. Your regeneration is a lot more effective than it is if you have 40k life but less mitigation. So that's a good passive for those people that want to build mitigation over life, or maybe that just want an extra boost if they're getting low on life, because you know, an extra 1% armor for every 5% life, as you get pretty low life, that can boost your armor up a fair bit. But yeah, maybe also we'll see some low life builds happening where you intentionally maintain low life. We'll see if the mechanics allow for that or not. Next passive skill is Wrathful. Wrath regeneration increases by 5% for 3 seconds after a block. So again, another synergy with blocks, and that'll obviously work really well with that initial skill, which was called Punish, I believe, yes, which increases your block chance. So obviously that'll work really well with that. Wrecking Ball, don't know what that does yet, but sounds cool. Next one, Against All Odds. When surrounded by 4 or more enemies within 15 yards, you gain 10% crit chance for 5 seconds. So you can build the Crusader close range as well, and they did try to state that in the videos as well. You can build it as a mid-range character or a close-range character, depending on which skills you take. So that's pretty cool, and that's obviously one that supports closer-ranged Crusaders, or maybe just gives the longer-range Crusaders a bit of a boost if they want to, you know, teleport in and kill a few guys and get some extra crit chance for a few seconds. 10% extra crit chance is pretty good, especially because in the expansion pack, crit chance looks like it's going to be a bit harder to get, because a lot of the endgame hit gear has lower crit chance overall from what we've seen. Next up is Finery, which gains 34 all resist for each gem of a different color on your gear. If you have 5 different gems, you'll gain another 34 all resist. That's really cool. You know, it's just encouraging people to experiment a bit. And with the addition of the new diamond gem, maybe throw one of those in your helmet, get your skill cooldown reduction, and get extra resist. Encourage people to make like a glittering suit of armor with all different gems. If only our gear changed color based on our gems like it did in Diablo 2. I really liked that. But that's cool. That's an interesting one. Next up, Heavenly Strength. Enable the Crusader to hold a 2-handed weapon in the main hand, but only if you have a Crusader shield equipped. So yes, the Crusader can have a 2-handed sword in one hand in addition to their shield. Diablo 2 Barbarian style. Now, speculations based on this have also said that the Barbarian will probably also be getting a similar passive ability that will allow them to dual wield two-handed weapons, maybe with some penalty. So we should be seeing that happening, but that's pretty cool. It's going to be cool to see like a two-handed flail going on with the Crusader shield. That'll be pretty epic. Now, it doesn't say what the drawback for that is. Where was that? Obviously, you have to spend a passive point on that, but yeah. In addition, you lose 10% movement speed. So that'll obviously work really well with someone using a teleport-based build, since the movement speed reduction won't be too bad. 10% is pretty big in Diablo 3, but you can counter that with you know, some extra legendaries and things. Next passive is Holy Cause, 10% more holy damage on weapon. Also procs the coefficient. Also proc coefficient increased by 10% on holy weapons. So basically, if you've made the effort to go to gearing yourself with a holy damage based weapon, you're going to get an extra bonus from that, which you know, that's pretty good, because a lot of people don't use holy based weapons now. They either use black weapons or they use cold weapons because of the extra effect like that. This finally gives holy some, you know, good reason for you using that essentially. Other ones we know about are Stand Your Ground, which increases block chance by 5%, reduces dodge chance. So you can be a blocking tank, but won't have that dodge, so that'll obviously work against that other synergy. And then two other passives we know about, Vigilant and Long Arm of the Law, but we don't know what they do yet. So Long Arm of the Law sounds like a range-based thing. Maybe increases range. I don't know what Vigilant does. But yeah, that pretty much covers it. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed that. Looking forward to the Crusader. I know I am. I'll definitely be rolling a Crusader come the expansion pack, as well as, you know, trying out my Demon Hunter and seeing the new skills that she gets as well. But pretty cool stuff. I'll continue to bring you guys some coverage of the Diablo 3 expansion pack and summaries of what we know in the lead up to release, and hopefully I get in the beta nice and early as well and can test that out. That should be pretty exciting. Anyway, in other news, tomorrow I am releasing some Diablo 3 console footage, so make sure to check that out, share it around, because it's pretty exciting. I get to release that before the actual game comes out. Yes, so good. Anyway, that's it for now. I'm ZiggyD, and thanks for watching.